This brings us to the Tripartite Pact, signed in 1940. Japan was added to the Rome-Berlin axis for mutual defense and military support. Germany, Italy, and Japan had signed agreements throughout the 1930s. A major one was the Anti-Communist Pact, signed in 1937, which Hitler broke when he decided to invade the Soviet Union. This pact, the Tripartite Pact now, required each of those countries to assist the other in any way possible, including militarily, if any of them were attacked by a power at present not involved in the European War or the Sino-Japanese conflict. And by this time, there was only one major power in the world not involved in the European War and not involved in the Sino-Japanese conflict. I'm going to pause a moment, hit pause, see if you can think of which major power this was. Okay, you may have guessed it was the United States. Germany and the USSR were currently fighting, but that meant the USSR was at present involved in the European War. This pact was an agreement to help each other if attacked by a power at present not involved in the European War. What this was a pact aimed at the United States. It was trying to deter the United States from getting involved in the conflict on either side. Also, what this did was agree to basically divide the world into spheres of influence. Germany and Italy would have Europe as their sphere of influence, and East Asia would belong to the Japanese. The German invasion of the Soviet Union in June 1941. This was Hitler's attempt at Lebensraum. I believe I said that close to correctly. Lebensraum means living space. This was not a new idea. This was not something that Hitler had created. This was an ideology that was about 50 years old and had been employed in World War I. Hitler just employed it more aggressively, shall we say. The Soviets responded with scorched earth tactics. And scorched earth means you withdraw and, well, scorched as in burn. If you burn the earth, you leave nothing. So scorched earth. Soviets destroyed anything of value as they withdrew. They withdrew hundreds of miles because at that time they could not stand up to the German army, which was much better equipped and trained. So as they withdrew, they destroyed anything of value to deprive the German army of resources. They burned their crops, they destroyed their factories, they killed their livestock, anything they could do so that the Germans could not use their resources as they were advancing. Keep in mind, the Germans advanced rapidly with tens of thousands of soldiers. Soldiers have to eat. Vehicles need gas. Vehicles break down. They need parts to use for repair. Typically, an army on the march on the advance would scavenge as much of these supplies as possible from the territories they conquered as they went. The Soviet policy was to leave nothing, hence scorched earth. Thousands of towns just disappeared. They did something similar when Napoleon invaded. I believe you've learned about that in this class. By winter, the Germans were at the gates of Moscow, and they laid siege to Leningrad as well. This lasted 2 years. This was brutal urban combat. Eventually, though, they had to withdraw. It's said that Russia has two great generals, Generals January and Generals February. In the Soviet Union, World War II became known as the Great Patriotic War of the Fatherland. This map shows the German advance into the Soviet Union. The pink territory is controlled by Germany, Greater Germany. This is the Soviet Union. The green represents the Soviet territories that the Germans took over. The yellow represents the farthest the Germans got into the Soviet Union, and the brown indicates that they never reached this territory. Poland, recall, which is located roughly within this circle, had been split by Germany and the Soviet Union. They had agreed prior to the German invasion that they would essentially rip Poland apart and each take half. Here you can see the city of Warsaw. We watched a video about the Jews in the Warsaw Ghetto. Some things to note about the German advance. First, as they advanced, they weren't very gentle. They did not observe many of the conventions about the laws of war. They also rounded up about 1 million Soviet Jews and sent them to the death camps. To look at their advance from a strategic perspective. First, Moscow, capital city, very important to capture, obviously. Leningrad, Stalingrad are also important cities to capture. Here, they're going for ports. If you can cut off access to ports, you can cut off access to supplies sent by sea. This region is known as the Caucasus region, and the Middle East is kind of below your slide here. Tens of thousands of tanks, trucks, and planes go through a lot of oil. And the Caucasus and the Middle East are very rich in oil, which makes them very strategic targets.